Hi, this is Joelle Fawcett, and welcome to episode 4 of the Soul Method podcast.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic.
Hi, and welcome back. I am your host, Joelle Fawcett, and founder of the Soul Method. Here at the Soul Method, our mission is to be your guide to heal from the past, be at peace in the present, and create a future you love. This episode is titled, Deal with Yourself. Although I will say I could have actually titled this episode, Nothing Good Happens After 5, but I will get to that in a few minutes. In the last episode, I shared with you about the tiny mad ideas of the ego, or that little voice in your head. And I promised in this episode to teach you one of the techniques I've learned to calm that voice and the emotions that go along with it. Now, I'm actually going to be doing a video to go along with this episode because it will be important for you to physically see this technique. However, I will describe it the absolute best that I can while we are here. First, though, let me tell you about the first time I experienced this technique. It was in the second session that I had with my coach, and like my first session, I arrived a ball of anxiety and frustration, desperately looking for help, and my ego was going a mile a minute inside my head. I shared with my coach about what was going on, about how my husband at the time needed to change, how he had done X, Y, and Z wrong, about how no one understood me. Since that wake-up call in my first session, I had fallen right back into old belief patterns, and honestly, looking back, I probably sounded like something out of a soap opera. Once again, my coach verbalized the codependent thought patterns. She said, "Right now, you can't see anything through the stories you are making up in your own head. You need to deal with yourself." Now, at the time, I really didn't know what she meant by deal with yourself. But that would go on to be a phrase I use quite often today, both for myself as well as when I am coaching clients. What this means is to quite literally be responsible for your own emotions to the point where you can process through all the things your ego has brought up and then be able to make requests from a place of peace. You see, there's a big difference between living in a state of codependence and the ability to make requests of people in our lives from a healthy place. When we are in codependence, we are needing someone else around us, whether it's our parents, siblings, children, or romantic partners, to be or do certain things so we can feel the way we want to. This looks like the emotional unloading I described in the last episode, where in past relationships, I would dump all my anger and frustration on my partner and tell him that he needed to do something differently so I could feel loved or at peace. Now, this is completely different than making a request, because let's be real, as people, we are going to need to ask things of others around us. And just because we have that need doesn't mean we are being codependent if we deal with ourselves first. Today, when I make a request of Joe, my boyfriend, it's because something is genuinely important to me and I'm asking him to be a part of it, or that I'd like to discuss something that I'd rather not do. He is always free to say yes or no to requests because I don't need him to respond a certain way. Requests are always made from a solution-oriented place and come with plenty of personal ownership, so there's no blaming involved, and they come with the emotional space for the other person's reaction, if he or she has one. If you're looking for the number one way to transform every relationship in your life and truly love every interaction you have with other people, this is it. When this way of living becomes a part of your DNA, you become in charge of how every relationship in your life goes, and you get to design it. I'll dissect all of this in a future episode because before we can get to that, we need to learn the process around releasing the ego so we can make requests from a clean place. So, what do I mean by making requests from a clean place? It is impossible to make healthy requests if you're bringing along with it all of your personal baggage. And by baggage, I mean the weight of all the emotional junk our ego dredges up and wants us to carry around for essentially the rest of our lives. When we take personal responsibility to process through that junk and release it, we can then make requests from a place of peace. Now, back to that session with my coach. At this point, she had asked me if I was ready to dig into some of the emotions I was feeling so I could release them. She said that if I was willing to dive deep into the layers under the surface, all of the negative could be dissolved. Honestly, hearing this really confused me because I didn't believe that emotions or memories could shift so quickly. That was, I didn't believe it until I experienced it for myself. You see, we are raised in a culture where the paradigm is that all modalities of therapy take a long time, whether it's talk therapy, which is probably the modality of therapy that most of us are very familiar with, or it could be self-directed therapy, like meditation. In our Western culture, we have mentally written a story that it always takes a lot of time, often years, for people to heal using therapy modalities, and that there are some people who will never be able to heal from their past. However, if you can be traumatized in just a moment, which, to be real, is often all it takes, why wouldn't you be able to heal just as quickly? After what I've experienced, I believe this to be true, and this is why my coach uses this technique. It enables you to experience shifts in your energy today, and while you may have to work on one memory or trigger a handful of times to peel all the onion layers back, if you're committed to the process, you will eventually become bulletproof. So, hearing this from my coach, I was nervous, but also incredibly excited at the prospect of relief. Never before had I heard a life coach or therapist speak this way, and I was willing to postpone my disbelief if she was willing to show me this process. The first thing my coach directed me to do was identify the feelings and emotions I was experiencing and put a number on them based on a 0 to 10 scale. On this scale, 0 is where you are completely blissed out and at peace. Think like summer Sunday morning where you have nothing to do, sort of peace. 10, however, is where you are completely overwhelmed by the emotion you are experiencing to the point where you cannot function properly and you have the potential to do harm to either yourself or someone around you. Now, these feelings and emotions can be described from a physical base, for example, experiencing neck pain, to an emotional base, like experiencing severe anxiety. The reality is that just about every uncomfortable physical feeling is connected to an emotional state, and vice versa. So, as you go through this process, you'll discover how they are linked for you. At this session, the emotions that were really up for me were anger, frustration, and anxiety. On the numbers scale, my anger was at a 7, my frustration was at a 6, and my anxiety was at a 9. So I'm going to interject here a personal belief, which is the alternative title to this episode: Nothing Good Happens After 5. What I mean by that is if you feel yourself emotionally at or over a 5, there are only 3 things that can happen. You will, number 1, take those emotions and unload them on someone around you. 2, suppress these emotions so they can bubble up later. Or 3, you will deal with yourself. Now, Joe knows when I get to a 5 or above on things, I take a time out. I know at that point, nothing good will come out of any conversation or choices I make until I process through what I'm feeling. Sometimes it takes me a minute to realize that I'm at a 5, like in that example I gave you last time. Most of the time, however, I'm able to identify it quickly and release what is going on for me so I can return to a place of peace. Now, my other personal belief around this is that I will not engage with other people if I discern that they are at a 5 or above. However, engagement is a topic for another day, but we will get there. For now, let's stick with dealing with ourselves before we get into dealing with other people. So, like I had identified with my coach, take a minute now to identify what is going on for you in your body. Take a deep breath and become present. What are you feeling right now? Where is there tension in your body? Where is your breath? Is your heart racing or is it calm? Are your shoulders rigid or is your jaw locked? Maybe you're really connected to your body and you can quickly identify what is going on for you. Maybe you're not and you're feeling numbed out right now. That's okay too. If you can, try to identify at least one thing, whether it's a physical feeling or an emotional state, and put a number to it on that 0 to 10 scale. Once my coach had written down the emotions I was feeling and the numbers I had identified next to them, she asked me to find a peace place. This is a mental place I would be returning to time and time again. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and centered myself the best that I could. First, I imagined myself on the beach, but that didn't really seem to fit. Then I went to a cliffside looking out over a mountain to a wide sunset. But that didn't really fit either. Of course, then my ego started to interject. This is dumb, this won't work, and besides, even if it did, I'm sure I'm going to do it wrong. Ugh, I took another deep breath and dug a little bit deeper. Then a forest came to me. It was beautiful. The ground was covered in bright green grasses and palms, and the sun filtered in waves of orange and yellow through the thick leaves of the trees. I was sitting on a warm rock, and I smiled. My coach noticed and told me, that is the place you will go to in your mind as we process through each emotion. It will always be a safe place for you. Do you understand? I nodded. I understood. Okay. Now, this process you can do lying down on your back or sitting up. For me, it has always worked better lying down because then I can truly relax into my body. But you do what works for you. There is no right or wrong here. My coach told me that she was going to say phrases while she tapped on different meridian points of my body, and I was to repeat her words and also share anything else that came up for me as we peeled the onion layers back and went deeper. A meridian is simply an energetic pathway through the body that allows for the flow of energy. These pathways all end in certain points of the body, If any of you are familiar with acupuncture or acupressure, these practices are all based on the meridian points and their corresponding pathways. All of the meridian points we will use for this practice are connected to the amygdala part of the brain. The amygdala is responsible for the instinctual fight, flight, or freeze response. It is responsible for stress, anxiety, panic, and most often when we have a traumatic experience in our lives, this part of the brain is activated. Using a process called tapping or emotional freedom technique, we can biologically retrain our brain how to respond to what we previously considered traumatic. Now, let me break this down a little bit. When we are actually in mortal danger, the fight, flight, or freeze response is incredibly useful to our survival. However, the reality is that most of us are living in a world where we are constantly activating that part of the brain due to a perceived danger that actually has no real threat to our lives. Even though the thought of losing your job or having a fight with your spouse might feel like you will physically die, the fact is that it's not the same as a saber-toothed tiger attacking you, which is what our ancestors had to deal with. As we have evolved, this part of our brain has not changed. And our subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between the saber-toothed tiger attacking you, which is a real mortal danger, and a perceived threat, like the possibility of losing your job. Our brain responds the same way to both. Here's a very basic example of what this retraining might look like. Let's say that when you were a child, you had a negative experience with public speaking. Maybe your teacher called you to the front of the class in the second grade, and you answered her question wrong, and the other kids laughed at you. Most of us have probably experienced something like this in our lifetime. Now, at this moment, when you're being laughed at by your peers, you start to panic, and the amygdala part of the brain is activated. From that moment on, you avoid public speaking, and the very thought of it activates the fight, flight, or freeze response in your body. With tapping on the meridian points, while we dive into this memory, we can retrain this reaction. When you retrain, you're able to then respond from a place of peace rather than a place of panic. Like I said in the beginning, I will do a video to accompany this episode to show you these meridian points on the body, and I will also do my best to describe them now. There is no right order to them, and you do not have to use all of them all the time. I've found that there are certain ones that I'm more comfortable using and connect to better than others. You will discover what works best for you. The first point is called the karate chop point and is on the side of the pinky blade of the palm. That's the fleshy part on the side of the hand. The second point is directly above the eyebrows. That's not on the temples, directly above the eyebrows. The third point is right below the eyes, on top of your cheekbones. The fourth point is in between the upper lip and the bottom of the nose. The fifth point is in the dip between the lower lip and the chin. The sixth point is directly below the collarbones on either side of the sternum. The seventh point is on the side of the body directly under the armpit. So, ladies, this one will be right on your bra line. The eighth point is directly on top of your head in the center. So take a moment and find these points for yourself as I walk through them again. You'll want to use the pads of your fingers to lightly tap, 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 tap on each meridian point. First point, karate chop, side of the pinky blade of the palm. Second point, directly above the eyebrows. Third point, directly below the eyes on top of your cheekbones. Fourth point, between the upper lip and the bottom of the nose. Fifth point, in the dip between the lower lip and the chin. Sixth point, directly below the collarbones on either side of the sternum. Seventh point, on the side of the body, under the armpit. Eighth point, directly on top of your head. Now, before my coach got started with this tapping session, she made something very clear to me that I want to make clear with you now. Everything that comes up in a tapping session is not personal. You may express emotions that you did not know existed, things that have been buried for years. You may rage against people in your life that you deeply care about because at some point, your ego created a tiny mad idea about them. Most of us have had things happen to us that should never have happened. I'm sure some of you have experienced abuse in some way or another traumatic event, such as the loss of a parent at a young age. In the process of tapping, the objective is not to vilify someone who has done us harm or an event from our past. The objective is to release all the energy we are currently carrying around so we can heal from the past and be at peace. For example, in the session that I'll share with you now, there's a lot that comes up about my childhood. What comes up has nothing to do with my mom or dad in the present, but instead, it has everything to do with my perceived experience as a child, which is what we look to release in the tapping session. Coming out of a session on your parents, you should be able to be with them in a new and peaceful way because you've released the junk you've been carrying around. What you don't want to do is create a situation where you avoid your parents because of all the quote-unquote terrible things that happened to you. Does that make sense? All right. Once my coach had explained this to me, she asked me to lie on the table. A lot of EFT practitioners use massage tables for this practice. And tap into the emotion that had the highest number for me, which was anxiety. Bring up the anxiety in your body, she said, and she started tapping on me. Where do you feel the anxiety? It's in my chest. I can't breathe. My body feels tight. All this anxiety. I repeated, all this anxiety, all this tension in my body. Why can't you let it go? Because then something will go wrong. Now, at this point, I was a little surprised. That answer had come out of my subconscious as we connected to the deeper levels of the emotion of anxiety. Stay with it, she instructed. Something will go wrong if you let it go? Yes, something will go wrong if I let it go. You have to be in control. Yes. I have to be in control. I have to be in control, or it will go wrong. It will go wrong and it will be my fault. It's all my fault. And at this, the tears started. She kept tapping. Repeat after me. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. When was it all your fault? It's always been my fault. It's always been my fault. It's always been my fault. When you were a kid, when was it your fault? I could never do it right. I was too much. I'm too much. I'm too much. I hate them for that. And then the anger started to come out. I started to breathe deeply, but my coach jumped in. Don't breathe it away. Go into it. Be with those feelings. So I'm going to go off script here and interject a little bit. When you go through this process, there's usually resistance to digging into these uncomfortable emotions at this level. Our egos really want to avoid them because they are so uncomfortable, or because we have a lot of fear around experiencing these emotions again because of all the traumatic memories that can come along with them. If you're dealing with heavy things and feel like you can't handle it on your own, I highly recommend working with a coach who is experienced in this practice. So, back to my tapping session. My coach continued. You hate them for that. I hate them for that. Who do you hate? My parents. I hate my parents. I hate my parents. I hate my parents. I hate myself. My breath caught. Again, another phrase that came out of my subconscious. I hate myself. I hate myself. I'm unlovable. I'm unlovable. All I wanted was to be loved. All I wanted was to be loved. Are you ready to love yourself? I can't. Why can't you love yourself? Because then they'll be sad. Your parents? I nodded. Now, at this point, I was deep in the process in almost a Zen-like state. Everything I was saying was bubbling up from inside of me, and as much as my ego wanted to get involved, I trusted my coach enough to allow whatever came up to also come out of my mouth. The tears had been rolling for several minutes, and as she'd been tapping, the emotion had gone from the anxiety into the anger and then into sadness. She continued, Your parents will be sad if you love yourself. They don't like it when I'm happy. I can't be happy. I can't be happy. I can't be happy. I can't be happy. What happens when you're happy? My mom gets upset. What happens when your mom gets upset? The world explodes. What happens if the world explodes? I'll die. She breathed. So your subconscious believes that if you're happy, you'll die. At this point, my eyes snapped open. What the hell? Every part of me knew that what she had said was completely true in the belief systems I'd carried out of my childhood. I'd just had no idea that they were there. Based on this, it was no wonder that I was completely miserable in my present life. She smiled. Are you ready to let that one go? I nodded, and she continued tapping. All this fear, all this fear, all this fear around being happy, all this fear around being happy, even though I'm afraid to be happy, even though I'm afraid to be happy, I completely love and accept myself. I completely love and accept myself. I can be happy. I can be happy. I can be happy. I can be happy. I can be happy and be me. I can be happy and be me. Breathe in. I breathed in deeply at her command, all the way into my belly, and then she instructed me, blow that junk away and go to your peace place. I blew it out, all of it, and I felt the vibration of my body settle down around me. Again, the image of the forest came to me. Suddenly, I started laughing. I was exhausted and honestly a bit weirded out by what I had just experienced, but I felt like a weight had been lifted off of me too. Everything about my body and emotional state felt different. Now, again, off script a little bit here. Most people will have a quote-unquote tell, a physical sign that the energy has been released. For me, I burst into the most ridiculous belly laugh you've ever heard in your life. For some people, they go into a Zen-like meditative space. I've seen people shake their arms or legs. I've seen people fall asleep or even start sneezing. You'll discover what yours is for you. of that, I have no doubt. And it can be a sign for you that the work of the moment is done. Like I said before, sometimes when you're dealing with really challenging things or doing this for the first time, it can be really hard to hold the space for yourself. I hope you can see how my coach was able to guide me through this process and make connections that I would not have been able to make on my own. If you're committed to self-tapping rather than working with a coach, or if you just want to learn all about this practice, I highly recommend the book, The Tapping Solution by Nick Ortner. When you are doing this practice on your own, you want to move quickly through the tapping points and speak aloud whatever comes up for you. Don't try to do it in your head, and go into the emotions that you're feeling. Start with whatever has the highest number for you, like I did with my coach in that first session when I focused on anxiety, as that was the emotion that had the highest number for me. You can start by just saying all of this, whatever the emotion is. Like my coach started with me, all of this anxiety, all of this anxiety, all of this anxiety. For you, it might be fear, anger, frustration, whatever it is. Be with it and state it, and then recognize where it is in your body. For me, in that session with my coach, it was all of this anxiety in my chest. I couldn't breathe. For you, it might be all of this fear in my stomach, or all of this anger on my shoulders. Be with it and identify it in your body, and then see what comes up for you. The first time you do this on your own, you might have to be with it for several minutes for something to start to come up. That's okay. Don't quit, and don't let your ego tell you that it's silly. Most egos don't like it when we tap, because if we establish that we are personally responsible for what's going on with ourselves, our ego has to take a back seat, and often they don't like doing that. So when I do tapping on my own, even still, I have to resist Sushi's tiny little voice, which, if you didn't listen to the last episode, that's what I named my ego. I have to listen to Sushi's tiny little voice telling me all of the reasons why this is a silly thing to do, why it's a waste of my time, and why it won't work, even after several years of doing this practice. Do it anyway. Go with whatever comes up for you as you go into the practice. Remember, you don't have to tap on every meridian point, and there is no right order to them. Do what feels right for you. Sometimes the things that come up have nothing to do with what you thought you had to tap on. Like in that session with my coach, I thought I was really ticked off with my current husband. What actually, though, I needed to deal with was emotions that I had been carrying from my childhood. Don't judge the process and be with it. When you've gone deeply enough into the emotion, you will feel it in your physical body. For me, in that session, I was crying. I could feel the anxiety in my chest. Then I could feel the anger come out of me as my voice changed. Like my coach instructed me, when you do this, you don't want to breathe the emotions away. Instead, you want to go more deeply into them to physically express them in your body and bring them up and out of you, instead of what we normally do in our culture, which is suppress them. In the process, after you've identified the emotions and gone deeply to see what's underneath of them, you want to move from stating the negative to stating the positive. Like my coach directed me, after we had gone through the layers and peeled away what was underneath of the anxiety, we were able to move to stating, I can be happy. I can be happy, and eventually release that anxiety and everything else that had gone along with it. This takes practice. So if it feels awkward and clunky and you're not sure when to transition the first few times, that's okay. Stay with it and let your intuition guide you. And when you feel the energy release, you breathe in deeply and exhale all the way out and go to that place of peace that you've established for yourself. One thing I highly recommend doing if you are doing this on your own is keeping a journal to track the emotions that you're feeling, the numbers on the emotional scale that you associate them with that day, as well as where you feel them in your physical body. Over time, you will most likely see themes and things that keep coming up for you over and over again. For me, one of the biggest things my coach identified as she continued to work with me was this theme of I can't breathe. And that became a huge clue to release some pretty traumatic events for me from my childhood that I didn't have any memory of. Now, for you, you might not have anything like that in your past. And if you don't, that is awesome. However, keeping a track of what's been coming up for you can help you move through the process more quickly and get to that place where you're releasing things on the regular and able to live in a state of peace in the present and completely healed from the past. Now, in the past, I've gotten pushback from people who are so headstrong on avoiding negative words that they won't even say some of the phrases that my coach had me repeat in my session. These are usually the people who are very committed to the law of attraction, which I talked about in the last episode. The thought of saying, quote, I hate myself, or anything of that nature sends them reeling, like they can't even utter anything that's negative. This is where I need to explain that there is a huge difference between affirming negative beliefs and acknowledging them. In the tapping process, we acknowledge the negative so we can process through it. Releasing the negative emotions will put the law of attraction to work for you. After all, if there's a bunch of junk hiding under all of your positive mindset, all you're going to do is attract junk. Like I said last time, you do not attract what you want. You attract what you energetically are. One question I get a lot is, when do I do this? Honestly, a lot. Or at least I use this tapping method a lot. It's become a habit for me, and anytime I feel myself going over a 5, I use this to bring myself back to peace. When you first enter this practice, you will most likely be dealing with trauma from the past and healing that energy. After you do that, you'll be able to use it for any situation that comes up in the present day. A good clue that you need to tap is that you feel the need to talk to multiple people about something negative that has happened in your life. For example, let's say your boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with you and you're feeling heartbroken, angry, and hurt. If you have the pull to talk to all of your friends and family about how you're feeling or explain all the reasons why you are right in the situation, you are actually needing to deal with yourself and your ego. Now, please don't take me personally. When we are raised in a codependent environment, it is completely natural for us to look outside of ourselves for assurance and peace, which is what I've done many times in my past, and I'm sure you've had an experience with this as well. What I'm saying is that if you feel the need to tell multiple people about an event because you're needing them to tell you certain things so you feel better, you're acting in codependency, and nothing anyone will tell you will actually release the hurt or anger that you're feeling. For true peace, we must look inward, and tapping is one incredibly effective technique to do this. Regarding the tapping session that I relayed here, this was definitely not the last time I needed to tap on my childhood or on the feelings of happiness, love, and worthiness. But what I can say is that after a short time of commitment to this practice, I am at peace with everything that happened in my childhood. I have a wonderful relationship with both of my parents, which I really enjoy. And if I do have a flutter of something that surfaces, it takes me only moments to process it through. As we bring this episode to a close, let me ask you, how are you feeling? What are your takeaways? Are you willing to give tapping a try? If you already have, does any part of my experience resonate with you? As promised, I will soon be putting up a video of this tapping technique so you can see it as well. If you feel like you have heavy things that you need to process through and want support, I would love to work with you one-on-one. You can contact me via one of the multiple options on the Soul Method Facebook page, or call or text 267-637-4131. Until next time.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic